Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Let's hop in. Today is Friday, September 30th, so we have maybe one more day, maybe not, like depending on when things roll around in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, whether they're following Japanese time to reset everything to the new month or not. I got everything done and I'll show that in a second. One of the things that's weird about the announcements here is now we're starting to get these kind of cross advertisements for Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, which is a completely different Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. Let's see. Like here at the bottom we say we will continue to operate Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links to create fun dueling experience for duelists around the world. We thank you for your support to enjoy Master Duel and Duel Links. See here for details, I guess. But yeah, there's really not, in my mind, the best explanation as to why you wouldn't have Master Duel and Duel Links be the same application, even if it just pops up a screen that loads you into Duel Links on one side and Master Duel on the other. At a certain point, I think Master Duel needs to be the main way to play. But Duel Links has a year, at least a year, on Master Duel and is much more focused on telling the narrative stories and showing the anime characters, where Master Duel pretty much never shows any of the anime characters. No, I don't think they've ever shown a single anime character or really even mentioned the single anime characters. This is just a card game. Plus, Duel Links plays differently. It has only 3 spots for monsters instead of 5. New accessories have been added that we can actually buy in this game. Addition to cards that can be generated has gone into effect. So now there are several new characters that can be cards that can be generated. And there are apparently new gates in the solo mode, which gives me more of an excuse to go back and do some solo mode stuff. Also, while I was playing off screen to get the Synchro XYZ festival done, I finished the Duel Pass, so we now have everything there. So yeah, everything is kind of working perfectly. It's easy enough to spend 300 gems just to get this, just to continue to have an account that has purchased everything. I don't think there's anything else new to buy. 10 days left on this selection pack, so when we get a new selection pack, there might be an argument to opening 10, 20, 30 packs of the new selection pack with gems, but I don't think I even want to go too crazy on that. I want to be a little bit conservative to get more gems for secret packs, where maybe you should be more focused on selection packs. And then we have 182 of these, so we can just start by purchasing 10 today. Yeah. The percentage of new cards is still pretty decent here, and this is a super rare, so we should ride getting a super rare and open another 10 packs. And this is an ultra rare, so let's just ride that some more. And super rares. Are you guaranteed a super rare each time? Or is it just the odds are fairly high that you'll get a super rare? Alright, so there we go. After opening a lot of those packs, we got just a rare. And a lot of these cards are like not, I think, particularly playable in the modern meta. These are old legacy cards that are just filling out the half of the 10,000 cards that Yu-Gi-Oh has in Master Duel or so. Well, there's 10,000 cards in general, and they only have like 7,000 actually in Master Duel. But I do think that number has gone up, so they have added some small number of cards, but not by much. And they are adding animations around that. They just released Cross Duels also. Yep, we do have a new gate there. So it's not just Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel that exists, it's also Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, which is the more mobile phone game, and Cross Duels, which is the 4-player Yu-Gi-Oh! Which, again, none of that makes any sense to be separate games. The Cross Duels in particular should just be a mode in Master Duel to bring people to Master Duel. Or maybe even go crazy and you make 4 different applications that all link to the same servers and have the same options as far as what you're really going to play. But yeah, I was doing particularly well, obviously, and so I managed to get all the way down, and I even pushed to getting the XYZ Synchro X versus XYZ Festival 2022. And interestingly, this does imply that there won't be another Synchro X XYZ Festival in 2022. But yeah, I got everything. Got all the rewards, got all the gems I could, which leaves me exactly one day here to potentially try and play with this deck and see if this deck can win for us and we can get up to platinum, which odds are low, frankly. Odds are very, very low that I would get enough victories to get up to platinum. For the accountability section, I did a little bit more tweaking on my Raspberry Pi guest Wi-Fi router. Just optimization, making sure that the files, the USB drives when plugged into it, will be mounted with the right permissions so you can actually read and write to folders, and that the Samba and Secure FTP servers are giving the right permissions so that you can actually read and write from it. Just things that I could have kind of easily not even bothered to test and just made assumptions on. And then I did a little bit of work on trying to get the WireGuard VPN to work again, and didn't get very far in that. I really need to turn off the device and just make another backup, or just hope for certain that the backups that I'm making on the device itself are accurate and going to work with the Borg backup software instead of just making a full image of the SD card. I kind of want both though, but yeah, it would be prudent to say the least to make a backup and before I start messing with it more. But yeah, if I get the WireGuard VPN working particularly the way I want it to work, I would just be very ecstatic with that progress, and the project is pretty much done at that point. Like, I could put any kinds of long list of web servers on it, but they're not that useful. The thing that gets almost to the point of being useful would be like trying to install a Calibre web server for ebooks, because mini DLNA doesn't handle ebooks, but it's not really worth it. Like, and generally you're going to have to install Calibre anyways to stay with the newest versions and to manage an ebook library anyways. Um, so I did a little bit of that, and then I did start playing Zero Escape, Zero Time Dilemma, which it started off really amazingly good in the first hour and 40 minutes with it all being voice acted and it all being cutscenes. And then when I started to play the second episode, and it had you jump into memory fragments because the story is all fragmented into different memories at different times, which is, I don't think, really helpful in any way as far as a narrative device. Once I jumped into the first memory fragment, it became way worse in the sense that you were... shouldn't have grabbed that one. It became way worse because the voice acting went away, and it was just in the escape rooms the voice acting goes away, and it is just a visual novel again at that point. And the escape room in the first memory I did was full of a lot of fairly moderately difficult puzzles without really getting any hints or help on it. Since then, I've done another episode, and in the other episode the puzzles were actually super easy. So maybe it was just a bad turn of luck, I don't know, but it was fairly frustrating. But yeah, there's a major disconnect between there's just a major disconnect between the parts that that aren't polished, the escape the room part of the game, and then the cutscenes you get at the very end where you have to make a final decision, which is often just flip a coin 50-50 to get a good ending or a bad ending. In fact, the entire game starts with flipping a coin, and if you get the coin flip right, the game ends in the first 5 minutes. So noticeably, this is the first episode in any series where I've shown the credits in the first episode, or that I can think of. It may not actually be true. I could see myself rage quitting on a game and then just popping up the credits from the menu. But yeah, Zero Time Dilemma visually looks weird because it definitely feels like a game that wanted to be its own separate thing, and then they forced it in the last second to be connected to the Nonary game series 999 and Virtue's Last Reward. But then the character design is way more just normal looking people, not high fashion crazy anime characters like in the two previous games, even though 4 of the 9 characters in Zero Time Dilemma are returning characters from the previous games. It was fairly hard for me to even recognize them, though. They look so different, and they're just animated so differently. It is an interesting experience because in Zero Time Dilemma you have Akane and Junpei, which are the 2 main characters, I would say, from the first game, and they're Japanese, and everybody else in the story is a Westerner, as far as I can tell. And so there you have a Japanese game creator 3D modeling Japanese characters next to what you would traditionally call white Westerners, and the skin tone is exactly the same. Like, they're not going particularly any more paler or yellower, which maybe it's racist to suggest that the skin tone should be yellow for the Japanese characters. But then again, noticeably, Junpei and Akane both have purple eyes, I think, and purple hair, so that they're not really being animated like a real Japanese person would be animated, with black hair and black eyes, brown eyes. And then, interestingly, they also have decided in this game to not put any of the characters in skirts, which is much in line with the way Westerners would dress, I would assume. Whereas if the game was set in Japan with Japanese characters, you would expect all the girls to be wearing either skirts or dresses. So yeah, and interesting there when you know the history of Japanese animators animating Japanese people from that manga style of just being white background paper with a black outline to represent a character, and how that translates into animation on the Asian side. And that how it has been traditionally very easy to localize away a Japanese character and say they were from the United States in previous animations or games. I would say though, speaking of animation though, I feel like Zero Time Dilemma almost certainly would have been better as in a manga series or an anime series. It does not benefit. I don't know if it cares or not about the puzzle rooms, but it does not really benefit from them. Whereas if you took the exact same events and the same cutscenes from Zero Time Dilemma and just added maybe a little bit of better animation and a little bit more writing, you could have a mini series at least of episodes. And we may very well be hitting a point where visual novels in general are starting to not make so much sense when people seem to be able to get their stories published in other ways or depicted in other ways, in better ways. At a certain level, animation will never be super cheap and airtime won't be available to everyone, but yeah, I do feel like Spike Chunsoft probably could have decided to get together an anime production company. Although I kind of do like the idea of testing things out in a visual novel form first before it gets a anime series. Although I'm not sure that system really has worked, because a lot of games get animes based off of video games and they still don't really succeed. But yeah, relatively speaking, even though I'm probably 4.5 hours into playing Zero Time Dilemma, I am very much at early days, and there is just no way to speed it up. So it's gonna be a long journey. The good news is it probably wraps up the journey as far as going through the nonary games, which leaves me only really with Danganronpa as far as other visual novels that I might consider continuing going down. And I do feel like there is a case that in the future, if I am going to cover any visual novel series, it needs to be very infrequently, and it needs to be one series that I just go through in a row, because I am being penalized by not remembering the events of the two previous games. But yeah, the narrative is also weird in Zero Time Dilemma, in that all of the characters knew each other and got to know each other a little bit before the game starts. And as that is happening, you as a player character really don't get enough of a initial backstory on the characters to know about them or care about them. In fact, I was very shocked at the beginning that they're naming people and saying I know this person, here's this person's name, and I'm like, how do you know these people? And why don't I know these people as the player? Well, so far so bad on this deck. It's gonna really suck if the meta has changed and Flow Wander doesn't work, or if I was just should have never crafted it in the first place. At a certain point, without even giving it more time to test it out, I can say that Flow Wander as a deck suffers pretty badly from being just too slow of a deck. And then when I don't want to pay attention, which is almost always, and play a bunch of cards in a row, trying to play this deck efficiently becomes a big problem. Let's see. Right. Banish this small card here. Normal summon this. Activate this. Banish this card, I guess. Activate this to add it back to the hand. I really don't know why I have Book of the Moon as a card. It doesn't feel like a card that I'm really getting a lot of use out of. Well, it is Friday, and I do have some ambition. Although, the fact that I've also jumped into Zero Time Dilemma and not played any more of Breath of the Wild is a problem. So, like, over this weekend, I can imagine myself potentially trying to work on Breath of the Wild, working on the Raspberry Pi guest Wi-Fi, set up some more, and playing Zero Time Dilemma. Also, I have the weekly dailies and probably some videos that need to be uploaded and some videos that need to be scheduled. We started Halloween month of October a little bit earlier, so Detention is airing on my channel at this point as a horror, Taiwanese, I believe, horror point and click game, which I don't think it's gotten any views at all for the first 3 or 4 episodes, which at this point, you know what, whatever. It's not worth whining about. But yeah, after October, the plan is to really only have one thing airing in the daily Steam games, daily PC game shorts airing otherwise. And I don't think I've gotten any views on the last 2 of those shorts either, so shorts are still fairly all over the place. And the goal and the hope is that after October, we could work our way all the way towards October of 2024 fairly quickly and be a year ahead as far as scheduling videos. And then start to think about doubling back up as far as pre-recorded footage. I wasted some time filling out the Publishers Clearinghouse website for $7,000 a week giveaway that like your odds are extremely low that you'd ever get that, and you have to go through their website that is just full of advertisements trying to sell you things. But yeah, in fantasizing about the idea of winning that, I have to admit there is a certain concept here around maybe slowing down a little bit more, since I'm already physically and mentally slowing down as far as how much pre-recorded content I am making. But yeah, having an excuse to slow down even more is potentially something that I would take advantage of. Of course, at a certain level, even if I was just super rich and never had to work another day in my life, as much as being a YouTuber's work, it doesn't really solve the issue of just being bored, and that is the bigger issue, certainly as the way things would go. Oh, that was stupid. Yeah. I still would want to pre-record footage and still would want to run my channel. And then at the end of the day, I still would want the same goals of being monetized at some point. $7,000 a day from publishers, or $7,000 a month. $7,000 a day would be more than enough money, but $7,000 a month from something like Publishers Clearinghouse, you lose probably half of that in the taxes on gaming winnings, so you're really only getting $3,500 a month, and then yeah, that can go away pretty good. Plus, you're not getting any kind of cost of living or inflation guarantee around that. You still would have to live pretty frugally to just live off of $3,500 a month, and if you're talking about paying for a family or something, that almost certainly isn't enough. Not if you want to have a retirement, not if you want to if you want to do something more. So, Sniper Ranger said at some point I had 4 spots you can summon on now, which I don't have a clue what that meant because the context has moved on. Yeah, we definitely are getting to a dangerous spot here where this deck has lost 4 times in a row, which is not an acceptable point at all. I may actually be outside of the season at this point to try to go up anymore. But yeah, this deck has lost 4 times in a row, and it's really boiling down to either I'm playing it so wrong because it's just a bad deck, or I'm playing it so wrong because it's too complicated of a deck for me to figure out how to play. And at a certain level, I think a lot of the top tier meta Yu-Gi-Oh decks are built around strategies that if you just don't know the strategy or don't know the cards, you won't really succeed. Alright, so here we have an option. Let's just try and read everything. If you have no cards in the graveyard, you can send this graveyard from your hand until the end of next turn. Any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. Or I could cancel this. This is affect monsters effects that we're not even going to be able to, he wouldn't be able to use at the moment. See, I could cancel this. Sniper Ranger says yes, the exotic, or maybe that's supposed to be exotic players are complaining about being ganged up on. Am I playing in the Exotica deck? I don't really think I am. There definitely is a certain point here where it is just more comfortable to go back and play with the Zodiac deck, even if the Zodiac deck doesn't work as well. Because, like, I understood that deck fairly early into playing it, and even got better with Sniper Ranger's help later at understanding the deck. But yeah, this is a Friday, so I don't want to go for a super long time. There definitely was a point here, if I had discarded this, it would have ended up with banishing some cards, but I'm not sure it would have banished enough cards to matter or change anything. Let's do this. Let's activate this. I imagine you want to discard all 6 of these cards because they don't matter. It would be kind of nice if you banish cards from your extra deck, that they would have an effect that would banish cards from your regular deck. And the opponent surrendered. Okay, fine. I will take that victory and not fall down, but I don't know if you can be particularly happy about someone surrendering. Sniper Ranger says the Exotica players are complaining about being ganged up on in Cross Duel. Well, I'm not playing Cross Duel, so that really doesn't affect me. I suppose one of the good things about Master Duel being a completely separate app compared to Cross Duel is that we aren't ever going to get any daily quest that tells us to go play Cross Duel matches, because that could be fairly annoying. Maybe I shouldn't put these traps down on the first turn. That's a thought. I am getting increasingly afraid that I should probably at least install Firefox on my computer and start to see what plugins I can transition over from Chrome to Firefox if I really do have to transition away from Chrome, because they start trying to block ad blockers, or uBlock Origin in particular. Now, it kind of sucked because I don't think Firefox has a sync option, but maybe it does. Maybe I could just install Firefox on cell phones and on my desktop, and it would just synchronize passwords and synchronize, well, just passwords, I guess, is the main thing that needs to be synchronized. Just cancel that also. Doing both of those in a row is almost certainly a mistake. Oh my goodness, I canceled my own card. Yep, that was stupid. But yeah, I should consider it. Get away from Google. Google, not particularly trustworthy. I don't know if Firefox is much better. At a certain level, I could probably just install Chromium or Chrome in Windows and then lose the Google aspectness of synchronizing passwords and things, but still use the same applications. And at a certain level, maybe that would work fairly well for me to just have Chrome installed and stick with Chrome instead of going to Firefox for all the macros and programs I have and extensions I have installed. But yeah, it really would not work if ads were just everywhere while we were looking at these articles. Like, we can give a general appearance of how awful, with just uBlock Origin turned off, a Video Games Chronicle article looks compared to how streamlined and more fair use, I would say, these games look otherwise, or these articles look otherwise, when you are blocking things. Let's see. A lot of these Video Games Chronicle articles we've already talked about, so going over October's PlayStation Plus Essential Games being announced is redundant. One thing we haven't talked about, though, is that mobile game, Little Witch Nobita, it's not a mobile game, it's a kind of oddly animated moe witch character in a Dark Souls like dungeon crawler game. Yeah, it is an odd mix visually compared to its actual gameplay mechanics that it's promising to give. Well, Little Witch Nobita, for some reason, decided for the summer to potentially have an update slash DLC. I think it is just a free update of having the characters in swimsuits. I think it's a one-piece swimsuit. The Little Witch Nobita is in that moe style, so she does look fairly young. But yeah, they decided to put out that new content, or try to put out that new content, and it has been, quote, under review by Nintendo. Now, at a certain point, I don't know if it's actually been delayed, and under review by Nintendo doesn't inherently mean that Nintendo is all of a sudden going to push for more of a family-friendly appearance, or censorship in general on their consoles. Nintendo has been shockingly open to having adult content on their consoles, but there might be this might be the new place where the battle takes place, the new battlefield, and that we start to see Nintendo sort of catch up with the same censorship that PlayStation has been doing, and in cases in the past Steam has been doing. Same is true in cases in the past PlayStation has been doing it. But yeah, it's probably a little too early to freak out, but these slippery slope types arguments tend to always go in one direction, downhill. There's another game that is just like a low effort, I think, Tetris game, or puzzle game, or shoot 'em up game, something very generic, low effort game that had anime girls, badly drawn anime girls, being wrapped in tentacles, and that too, I think, was actively just not allowed on the Switch. I almost wouldn't be surprised if it is a case where they simply are trying to delay any announcements of any adult games around the holiday season. But yeah, the Japanese are about to go into Golden Week, I think, or the Asians, countries in general, are about to go into Golden Week, so I wouldn't imagine that there's going to be a lot of announcements or things happening for the next couple of weeks in the East. And at a certain level, I almost could, like, I don't ever want to endorse any censorship at all, but I could see Nintendo having pause to give perhaps feedback and not actual requirements to the creators of the Little Witch Nobita series, and ask them if that's really the direction they want to go. But inherently there's a problem just between the Western gaze, I guess is what you would call it, compared to the Eastern gaze. And by gaze I mean gaze as in Gaze, just to clarify that. My point being that people in the West seem to always have this suspicious, xenophobic idea that all Japanese anime creators are perverts, and that they are just trying to slip one by putting a moe character in a swimsuit, when really that is kind of just traditional and normal and all around the world for summertime, which is happening now in Asian countries, for people to go to the beach and swim and be in swimsuits. And it is a scrutiny that is, I would say, a little xenophobic, in the fact that it is not really placed on Westerners from Westerners. Like, the fact that volleyball players are in two-piece bikinis is done specifically to lure at them, and nobody questions that. The swimsuits and the ballerina outfits and the things like that in a lot of young kids' activities when it's a girl tends to often be never questioned at all as to the way those look. So, and sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it's outfits that are like that Netflix Cuties series where it's doesn't really come off as appropriate. The music that kids listen to, and the wording and a lot of rap is totally not appropriate, and nobody questions that. But the truth of the matter is, when you have a highly protective, puritanical parent, they're just not going to be happy with the real world and the way the world is, whether for better or worse. In any situation, they're always going to find something to be unhappy about, and they often tend to target things that are the least normalized, or the least closest to them, as the enemy. So there's unfair treatment. Although, on the other hand, there really isn't an equivalent to a moe art style in the Western world. Like, it's already been stamped out. It's weird to even have a kid character or a young-looking character at all in video games, and because of that, the art has suffered. Certainly. But yeah, I always am keeping my eyes peeled for potential censorship because it doesn't get talked about far enough compared to as much as it should be pointed out. And certainly for a free country like the United States, you'd think there'd be basically no censorship when it comes to fake animated things, because that's what we are literally talking about here, is just fake animated characters that are not based off of any model or any real person. And it all connects, certainly, to a much bigger story that's not just being fought on the battlefield of video games. Like, it connects to every type of expression and every type of art form out there. A novel like Lolita certainly would not have been able to be written today, and yet it tells a important story that I think people really should be able to read, at least if they want to read it. People don't even know what the narrative is there, because it's obviously, if you do read it, it's obviously a tale saying that yes, this older man's infatuation with a younger lady is wrong. It's not actually giving the message that it's good, as many people see that. And certainly in the United States, books getting banned is increasingly getting crazy. Like, no books really should be banned at all, and the push is increasing at a rapid pace to ban as many books as possible from school libraries and libraries in general. And if you're banning books in the library, you're usually fighting book nerds and librarians. So I doubt there's enough book nerds and librarians out there willing to go get a noose or get a gun and hang the person that's trying to ban books in the library. So it'll be a slow point until you get a revolution to set things back in the opposite direction. And it's kind of crazy to have to say there might need to be some violent protection of freedom of expression, but really, to protect anything, you have to be willing to enact some form of force on it. Like, the idea that people could sit down and talk about things like mature adults is clearly a lie. I'm not sure it has ever happened in the history of humanity. Anyways, moving back to video games though. We already talked about Wild Arms, Shadow Hearts adding the Final Fantasy and Scarlet Grace composers. And Video Games Chronicles is definitely getting more and more delayed in their articles. Skull and Bones being delayed 4 months at the last minute. We also talked about Cyberpunk hitting 20 million sales milestone. Every time I see this character, I feel like this is a important secondary lead character, but honestly, this may be the character you actually play as, or at least the general depiction of what your main character could look like. Valve confirming the dates for the next 3 major seasonal sales. Valve has a Warner Brothers publisher sale right now. Disney Dreamlight Valley's first major content update targets an October release. It will add Lion King Scar and continue the main story among other features. I guess you add that one to your hand. And then I'm gonna just put this face down and then the turn. Yeah, what I kind of want to see with Dreamlight Valley is for it to get a few more interactions and kind of have this promise of being an Animal Crossing that gets more activities and potentially gets away from a lot of grinding or daily grinding. But also I want to see an update that actively promises that you'll get content without having to buy it and that pay real world money, or that it won't have microtransactions in it, because that's really my concern. There is a weirdness, I think, around Dreamlight Valley in that you're playing as effectively a Disney adult, and so the whole game feels like it is targeted towards Disney adults, and you have to assume that is definitely their plan, because a kid that watches Disney stuff now isn't really watching Pete's Dragon, where Merlin is from, I believe, or I think it's Pete's Dragon that Merlin's in, but I could be thinking of a different movie. But it's a very old Disney movie in the flat, old, hand-drawn animation style. A kid today is not even really watching Mickey, which also kind of kills the idea of a Disney World or a Disney theme park really nowadays, because the kids are going to want to do the Star Wars rides and the well, mostly the Star Wars stuff and the Harry Potter stuff. So yeah, kids are not interested in that. Kids would have been in previous generations more into like Jake and the Neverland Pirates and some of the other series that are fairly new to those interconnected worlds, or not really interconnected worlds of Disney. Kids would be interested in things like Frozen, if anything, and Elsa is nowhere to be seen in this game. So yeah, it is weirdly a Animal Crossing game for Disney adults, and maybe that will work. There is something to what I think it was Jeff Grubb that was saying about, yeah, when you're looking at the back of a character and you've got white patches on jeans, there is a bit of a dump truck there. There's some big booty. And that may come from the animators deciding to have 3D models that have a big booty. Or it may also just be that they didn't really care and they just pre-bought 3D models that tended to be in that direction. Right, we may be able to win now. But yeah, the main problem is farming and fishing is not really gameplay mechanics that I want to engage with. I activated this card when I probably shouldn't have. Let's see. This looks like the first actual news story we have today. Sony has confirmed launch dates for the PlayStation Stars loyalty program. The reward scheme debuts in Asia today and is coming to the Americas and Europe in October. You'd have to kind of get into the numbers before it started to feel like it was a good deal, or potentially a good deal. And in a lot of these reward programs, if you were already spending that kind of money on PlayStation, they're good deals then. But if they're encouraging you even once to spend extra amounts of money on top of what you normally would have spent, then they are actually costing you money almost certainly. And that is usually how it goes with reward programs, is that you end up spending more money, not less. Or, yeah. There's really no other way. Right. Send that to the graveyard, send that to the graveyard. It does, as far as running a business, work fairly well, and I guess this is a trick if you are running a business and you want to implement censorship or say no to something without slamming the door and saying absolutely no. It works fairly well for Nintendo to just say, well, this is under review, and then they just never get back to you, or 3 months later they are still not back to you. And that was the whole point of the Nintendo approval process and seal of quality. And we've never seen anybody lately try to make a non-approved game for the Nintendo Switch. In part because they have such encryptions on it that the Digital Millennium Copyright Act would prevent someone from making a game that that worked on the Switch without having the appropriate key, encryption key, to launch it. course, that also potentially opens up Nintendo to being sued for anti-competitive terms, but that's a court case that would go on forever. Noticeably, there has been no new news of the Epic versus Apple lawsuit where Fortnite was removed from the Apple iOS store because they tried to do an end run around giving Apple a cut from Fortnite V-Bucks sales. And Fortnite still isn't back on Apple products quite in the same way. I think there's a way you can do it, but it's weird. Noticeably, the Fortnite has not gotten a ton of press lately. They really haven't done anything big, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're hiding the fact that they are severely suffering by not being on iPhones, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people who at one time would have been obsessed with Fortnite have moved on to the next obsession as far as little kids. I think we had already talked about this video showing Returnal's PC menu, settings menu. Yep. It really is crazy. Here we have yet another picture of a female character with the camera showing her backside, her entire backside, but certainly as a person who looks at female butts, I notice a female butt here. It's so crazy that Anita Sarkeesian, in one of their Tropes versus Video Games videos, complained about there being strategic capes in male characters having capes that cover their butts, and then the games almost always showing female butts, because having just played Darksiders 3, where there is a sash/cape covering up the butt of Fiore as a character, it didn't make me like the character more or respect the character more by having her backside not be shown. But I would say strategic capes probably are a thought in general for some of these games. And at a certain point, this is actually an unfair screenshot to even use as an example, because this was a screenshot made by Video Games Chronicle themselves, and they have actively, in screenshot mode, tilted the camera down. I know fairly for a fact that when you're actually playing this game, Returnal, the camera is actually higher up, pointing downward from kind of a tilted downward angle. And maybe they tilted the camera just to get more of these glowing, well, for lack of a better term, tentacles. But yeah, it's not really a fair depiction. See if this video will actually play and we can actually show a more accurate thing. Like they had this whole face technology in this trailer that they make a big deal about, but then that's really not the way the game looks. So yeah, when you're actually playing the game the camera actually crops off when zoomed in at her hip height, and even when you're not zoomed out, the camera is at a higher downward angle. So I guess it's just kind of a dumb thing to obsess about again in any way, and at a certain point it is an obsession of mine. Alright, let's see if this works. Jeez, how in the world did I summon that? I didn't realize I could summon this guy. Of course, the real problems around Returnal are that the game is just a little too hard and just not visually appealing as far as the landscapes and the character designs. I really wish that Returnal had more of a story to it that people actually cared about, because it definitely feels like the creators of Returnal cared about the story. But then they make you play the game multiple times over. Speaking of games that you might play multiple times over, I looked at some speedruns from a couple years ago as far as Darksiders 3 when it first came out. There's like a 5-minute speedrun where you just glitch through the game completely, which just shows that the game is broken enough to not really be speedrun that way. So there's also a less glitchless speedrun that's about an hour. And arguably, if you're gonna try and speedrun a brand new game just to get to the second playthrough, you might as well just start with a save file that's on Apocalypse 2, 3, or 4. There's also a duplication glitch in the hour speedrun that they use to get up to level 100 plus very quickly, which you would have to do that over the course of a couple playthroughs to do it normally. And the speedrun I did watch went in a slightly different order, but I don't think that particularly matters that much, and that if they defeat one enemy before the other. In a lot of ways, Darksiders 3 feels like what if Super Metroid was designed in such a way that it was so focused around the idea that you could go to any boss at any time, and then you would get a transitional ability after beating the first or second boss, regardless of who the first or second bosses were, that would just make it a little bit easier to move around, but not actually affect anything, because you could have always reached all of the bosses and fought them in any order. Yeah, that's not a great way to design a game, in my opinion. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says Sackboy: A Big Adventure PC reveal trailer confirms an October release date. The platformer is the latest PlayStation game to jump to PC, October 27th. I want to watch the trailer here just to remind myself as far as which Sackboy game this is, because I think there's 2 or 3 of them. And I assume that this is the newest one. See, this trailer is in Spanish. So it's platforming, which I kind of knew that's what Sackboy was. But is it a platforming experience that you have to create yourself, or is there a single player experience there that you can enjoy without engaging with the level design aspects? Because I seriously doubt too many people are going to bother to try and make their own experiences in the Sackboy game now. They were doing that when it first launched, certainly. Seems like if you pre-order the games, you get Connor from Detroit Become Human, Ghost of Tsushima, Jin Sakai, Deacon St. John from Days Gone, and Sam Porter Bridges from Death Stranding. In a lot of ways, this also highlights how there aren't even that many iconic characters in PlayStation games. I don't think a single one of these was an exclusive. Maybe Days Gone was a PlayStation exclusive. But yeah, Death Stranding wasn't an exclusive, Ghost of Tsushima wasn't an exclusive, Detroit Become Human wasn't an exclusive. And then Connor from Detroit Become Human is in no way as interesting as Sam Porter Bridges and Jin Sakai. Same is true for Deacon St. John. These are very much lesser characters. I'm still just waiting to lose, I guess. Yeah, they're describing the game as a 3D platformer. Only. So maybe I'm thinking of a completely different Sackboy game. At the core of it, even the concept of Sackboy, I mean, you want an iconic character as much as you can, but visually he's not that iconic. He's no Mario, certainly, and the name is not great either. I think you don't name Mario Plumber Man or Jump Man in the long run. Nintendo learned that lesson. In the interest of experimentation here, let's try the Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck. Let's see. October's, quote, free games with Amazon Prime Gaming have leaked. And now there's an update. They've been confirmed. Let's see. Fallout 76. I thought that game was free to start with anyways. Middle-earth Shadow War, Total War, Warhammer 2, Glass Masquerade, Loom, Hero's Hour, and Horus. I don't know what Hero's Hour and Horus is. Loom, I think, is a really old game. Glass Masquerade, I think, is probably a decent single A title or indie title. But yeah. And I guess at a certain level, Fallout 76 and the Battle.net pass, it makes a lot of sense to grab anything, well, grab all the games if you really care, from Amazon Prime. But yeah, grabbing Fallout 76 for free, if the Microsoft Activision Blizzard acquisition goes through at some point, there's a chance that anything on Battle.net would be merged into a Steam account. Although it very possibly would just be merged into a Xbox Games Live account. I don't see any real reason to actually play Fallout 76. I haven't even gotten around to playing Fallout 4. And inherently, I should just apologize every time I think of Fallout 4 because that game was gifted to me and I just never got around to getting to it. And I've learned my lessons at this point to not promise that I'll, in any reasonable time, play any games gifted to me. I still appreciate people gifting me games. I want people to gift me games, but it is to just give me the potential option to play a game when I get around to it. It is not to in any way guarantee that I actually will play that game or play it in any quick amount of time. I wish I had more time and energy, as most people do, where I could just stream for 8 to 10 hours a day playing games and just burn through my backlog of Steam library. But even if I did that, I wouldn't have anything great to say. I would just be tired and burnt out. As somebody who's worked other jobs where they are just overworking me and exhausting me and tiring me out, it just leads to me making more mistakes and being upset and unhappy and in general just not having anything creative to say or to add as input. And you see that certainly with desperate streamers on things like YouTube and Twitch in particular, just people desperately trying to well, this is going to be risky, but we'll do it. Yeah, there's plenty of desperate streamers out there that are trying anything and everything to get views and be successful. We will eventually get to the news, I'm sure, that Google Stadia has been announced to be shutting down, and apparently so few people actually spend any money on it that it's financially viable for them to just refund everybody instead of continuing, which that is definitely a sign of a major failure. But I can't imagine that the Stadia would have actually succeeded. Like, the way it was offering things, the way it was doing things, none of that really ever made sense. And trusting Google to do anything is always a mistake, because they're just not going to stick with any of their plans or ideas. Of course, I'm trying to trust Google to continue to run YouTube, and I almost certainly have too high of a risk of that biting me in the butt. I need to get my servers running and start backing up videos for real, and that's a project that I'm first is I need to physically move the furniture and the servers, and then I need to actually start working on them. Let's see, moving on. PlayStation is giving Top Stars members priority in customer service. This is probably an example of where it pays to give bad customer service, and now they literally are they are literally trying to make people pay for better customer service. Um, Which, that's not even really how customer service should work. That's an insane thing to say out loud, even if you were secretly doing it. I'm sure plenty of customers, plenty of companies do have special hotlines in the higher tier customer service. Almost all companies of a certain size would have something like that. But you don't say it out loud, and you don't make it obvious and apparent that you as a company don't value humans equally. But yeah, that is elitism by definition. But yeah, at a certain level, that's just not how customer service works either. Like, if somebody's calling and they need a password reset, the first person to answer the phone can do a password reset on customer service. You don't need to be at the toppest tier of customer service that's looking deep into the database to figure out why your password is not working, even though you've tried to reset it multiple times. Like, and the fact that it has become normalized that the lowest tier of customer service is just assumed to be so either incapable or incompetent to do even the basic things is a problem, certainly. And at a certain level, I don't want to come off as xenophobic, but I think it probably would have been a better system if all countries, or almost all countries, refused to allow companies to outsource customer service in particular. If you had to talk to somebody who was natively speaking your language first, but also just in general understanding the culture of your country and the attitudes and the way things are expected to be done in the country, that would work, I think, a lot better for a lot of countries. Not all of them, certainly. Customer service by Chinese people in China, for Chinese people in China, probably wouldn't get them much of a better experience. But inherently, the system we have now is that everybody around the world is getting customer service by Chinese people or by Indian people, is more the stereotypical setup. Yeah, Sony is increasingly, with every decision they make, sounding dumber and dumber. To the point where I have probably a little bit of a bias since I played the Xbox 360, but that was nearly 10 years ago, was the last time I played an Xbox game. And certainly I don't have a bias or love for the Nintendo Switch that I've played way more recently. But yeah, I just can't imagine that there are people that still like Sony at this point, when so much bad has been done and so little good has been done to counter it, to counter the bad. I could see loving the PlayStation 3. I could see being on that side of the fight compared to the Xbox 360. I could see loving the PlayStation before Xbox Games Live really became a thing and the offerings there. I could see even shifting to more loving the PlayStation when the Xbox tried to do the always online thing, which they didn't quite implement that, but they mostly have implemented that as a thing. Yeah. It feels like I lose regardless at this point, so I might as well just stick with Zodiac Tri-Brigade, because neither one of these decks feel like they're actually competitive anymore in meta. But yeah, when the PlayStation 3, when the PlayStation 4 came out and it wasn't backwards compatible with the PlayStation 3, that was the first step where I think logically people should have gone away from the PlayStation and said, no, I'm not going to re-buy all these games on the PlayStation 4. The entire lifetime of the PlayStation 4, there was never enough system sellers, or even any system sellers, that were exclusive enough to really make you want to buy it. It's Last of Us was basically it for the PlayStation 4, and now on the PlayStation 5 it's remakes of Last of Us. Meanwhile, anybody who would have had a long-term commitment to the PlayStation mostly loses that without the backward compatibility for PlayStation 1 or 2 or 3, and they've never supported backwards compatibility quite well enough for the 1 and 2 games either. Plus, if you're like a Japanese fan and you're big into Japanese RPGs, there aren't even that many extra Japanese RPGs coming out these days for the PlayStation 5. And you see it certainly in the sales of PlayStations in Japan. Moving on, Sega, another stupid company, has announced their first blockchain game, which I don't know if they have anything more to it than that. Like, noticeably there seems to be no screenshots of what the game would be, or no name of it. The new title, which will be developed by Double Jump Tokyo and with Sega's leading the use of its IP, will use blockchain technology. And that seems to be it. And instead of showing us a video that in any way relates, they are just showing us the Sega Mini as a video. Because Video Games Chronicles needs to have a video for every single post, whether they actually have a video or not. It's ridiculous. Okay. Start with this one by tossing this one. Destroy that one. Activate that one. That probably won't activate that much. But oddly, we can't chain it and block that effect, which resolved. Maybe we can. Let's really screw this guy over and cancel his effect for the rest of the turn. Add that to the hand. Activate this effect to special summon one of these on the field. We'll put him over on this side. Nope, his effect still works. Okay. So we should probably keep this fairly tight so he doesn't summon too many characters. Banish that card. Summon this card. Go ahead and play that and add it to the hand. And attack. And we'll win there. Video Games Chronicles says the Shenmue anime likely won't be renewed for a second season. Season 1 has been removed from the Adult Swim website. Which the Roku app for Adult Swim is fairly weird in how many shows are actually on there that have been shows that have been canceled for a long time. That being said, yeah, Adult Swim as a kind of Cartoon Network spin-off channel for late night adult content. They've started some shows that people really liked, and then they've taken way too long to animate new episodes of those shows, and then they've canceled those shows. Quite a few of them, to the point where you almost assume that Rick and Morty has a slight chance of also going in that direction. But yeah, Rick and Morty could be fairly slow and get to 10, 15 seasons very slowly before the creators die, and even at that they might hand the show off to other writers. Or it could just end on one season and just be done with it. Like last season's ending of Rick and Morty would have been fine as an ending for the entire series. Even the first season's ending would have been kind of fine as an ending. They do kind of like to end them on cliffhangers, and they probably should stop doing that. Or they should have in their back pocket a separate ending written and ready to go if they do get canceled. As for the Shenmue video game based anime, this looks like kind of an old school flat animation style. You can also see in this picture the color palette is a little bit too brownish, as it were. Just a lot of reds and browns in that one image, as far as an image to be shown. But yeah, Shenmue 3 didn't sell particularly well, and with Deep Silver calling it a core niche game and not a mass market product. And yeah, I just don't really wouldn't have really expected there to be a Shenmue anime that succeeded that well. The fact that Adult Swim picked it up and it wasn't on something like Netflix just screams that it wasn't likely to succeed in the first place. Because Netflix, I think, is far more willing to waste money on any anime series. Just in the hope that somebody succeeds at that. Somebody watches it and somebody stays subscribed to Netflix watching it. And it is definitely a different model. I imagine Cartoon Network is not getting $10 a month for every subscriber that has extended cable to watch Cartoon Network. Um, which that is in part why we're seeing the death of extended cable, whereas, and in all actuality, extended cable was never really alive in the first place. It was on a breathing tube since birth, to use a gross analogy. Extended cable, in general, you look at all those channels that are in extended cable packages, and 99.9% of it was garbage. Not just to one specific person of one specific fandom, but everybody hated him, hated the content that was being made on most channels. Well, I looks like I'm doomed. We really have no reason to continue playing today either, so yeah, I think I'll just lose here and call it a day. We'll double check that we got all the daily quests done, but that's about as much as we need to do. Since I played off screen on Wednesday, but playing off screen does spend extra time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, which I don't really have time for. Yeah, I would need 3 more wins to go up, and I think I'm probably out of the rotation anyways. So we'll drop down to silver, and hopefully we'll get back up to gold. As far as daily quests, I didn't have any. Darn it. Which means now in the new month, we need to do a duel live and a play some games, but I may just do that off screen. Instead, I want to just go through this news. I'm moving fairly slow through it, probably in part just because I'm moving fairly slow in general, not going on to a whole bunch of rants. And it's a shame that I often run behind, because either I'm going in on rants in which I'm speaking with passion, or I am just moving slow and am being fairly dispassionate about the news. Today I'm being more dispassionate. Scorn's release date has been moved forward. The first-person horror adventure game is coming to Game Pass on day 1. I feel like it's 1 week earlier, probably just to avoid conflicting with something else. 1 week earlier isn't that much, really. At a certain point, I imagine if this trailer had come out and people were super unhappy with what was being shown in Scorn, they would have delayed it. I suspect maybe a little bit, but maybe not. They may have just always planned on shoving the game out regardless. I still have some slight concerns that Scorn is going to feel like this weird kind of puzzle adventure game that's a little too short and is going to try and lean on its imagery and its graphics too much, to the point where it feels like it's a walking simulator with just a few puzzles and maybe is only a couple hours long. Although there is an interesting artistic argument to be made. If you make something grotesque and horrific, maybe you can make shorter games around that. Maybe you don't have to go 60 hours if something is actively unpleasant to look at, even if it's visually polished. I don't know if that's really been ever proven to be a case, but it would be an interesting thing to investigate. Xbox Live Games with Golds have been announced. It includes Windbound and Bomber Crew Deluxe Edition. I believe somebody also gifted me Bomber Crew Deluxe Edition, so that's another game that I'd have like an excuse to go and play. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet introduces Wiglet. Wiglet is not related to Diglett despite the appearance. Okay. Yeah. So, another Pokemon. Not really that cool of news as somebody who's not really a huge fan of Pokemon to have an entire article written about a single Pokemon being announced. But at this rate, I think you probably are getting fewer and fewer new Pokemon in Pokemon games. And as such, it probably is more impactful to mention the new characters when they are talked about. Plus, they're 3D models now and not just flat 2D pictures. Video Games Chronicle says NetEase has hired the Watch Dogs lead for a new Montreal studio. Watch Dogs 1 and 2 creative director Jonathan Morin will create a new IP. Is it fair to potentially blame Jonathan Morin for the fact that creatively Watch Dogs 1 and 2 was pretty bankrupt and not really great games? I almost would want to excuse it and give them a second chance, because really it was just Ubisoft that said, hey, make an Assassin's Creed game in the future and call it Watch Dogs. But then some of this has to fall on his shoulders, as far as the fact that Watch Dogs 1 and 2 are significantly different in tone and in narrative and gameplay. Watch Dogs 2 basically a completely different game to Watch Dogs 1. So some of that probably should fall on his shoulders. But yeah, we'll wait and see. Wait 4 to 8 years to see if he ever manages to actually make a new game. I believe NetEase is a Chinese company in general. Saudi Arabia says it will spend $13 billion to acquire a leading game publisher. The country's Savvy Games Group claims it will invest a further $37.8 billion in the games industry. Now, at a certain point, this logo is just not going to work if this logo starts showing up on video games to Westerners, because at the basic level, Westerners can't read this. At a deeper level, this looks like foreign, just weird terrorist writing, for lack of a better term to use. And you've got a sword on here, a saber. And it all feels too close to Saudi Arabia to actually work. I guess it's important to also point out that Iran right now is having a lot of people push back on the strict religious restrictions and the religious police and hijab restrictions in Iran. But that's not Saudi Arabia, but they are both in the Middle East. Just don't get too confused. I'm sure they have a long history in which they're not always friendly to each other. But yeah, even the color palette for a Westerner, green, is not the greatest. Although at this point, so far we haven't seen any of these Savvy Games Group investments come with any real caveats so far. It'll probably be years before we saw them eventually have influence or have members on the boards of games to actually implement influence on games, or we start seeing video games be more halal, for lack of a better term, more in line with the or more in line with the way they run their own country. There's notes here of crackdowns on female activists and homosexuality, It's run by the Crown Prince, who killed that journalist who spoke out against him and had him chopped up in the embassy. And I don't think I have to say allegedly there. Yeah, it just doesn't really feel like anybody in the West should really be doing business with Saudi Arabia. And yeah, the idea of economic politics is not an idea that I think actually works in a lot of situations. I don't think embargoes and things like that work in a reasonable amount of time. Maybe they do work in general, but there's been embargoes against North Korea for decades, and since pretty much the Korean War, I believe. And North Korea is still around and still a threat and still a danger. Whereas actual politics of actually going to war and fighting people, those are bloodier conflicts, certainly in the short run, but they actually tend to get some level of results, even if it is often just that countries go to war and end in a stalemate and a truce and a treaty. Moving on back to video games, Google confirms it will shut down Stadia. The game streaming service will be discounted and discontinued in January. At a certain point, there might be an argument if you get Stadia controllers really, really cheap to buying a Stadia controller. I guess the question would come down to, does the controller technology connect quick enough via Bluetooth, or are Stadia controllers connecting via a proprietary wireless connection? But yeah, I'm talking a controller probably needs to be somewhere $12 or cheaper, and then you could buy 4 or 5 of them at most, and try and use them with like Raspberry Pis and things like that. But I would have to do some research around that. I wouldn't be surprised if actually refunding, they say they're refunding it all the purchases made on the Google Store. Maybe that would be as credits for the Google Store. But I bet you don't have to actually send the controllers back or any other hardware back. If you did have to send it back, I'd almost wonder if this is Google realizing that in the chip shortage, it's actually more efficient to resell and reuse the controllers and the chips inside of Stadia devices. I don't know what other Stadia devices actually existed other than the controllers. Maybe there was a little dongle that you plugged into the back of a TV. But yeah, I'd have to do some research, and I'd have to actually see a sale, and then maybe it would make sense to get a Stadia controller. Otherwise, there's no reason to be involved with Stadia now that it's being shut down, and there really was no reason to be involved with Stadia before it was shutting down. And you also need to be careful not to get scammed, because there are definitely going to be people that try to hoard the controllers and sell them later as this rare video game collectible that has some real value, when almost certainly it won't. I think we had already talked about this, but Ed Sheeran's new Pokemon inspired song will be featured in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which the idea that a Western singer's song is being added into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is weird. It paves an odd potential future in which we start to see more pop singers try to promote themselves and their music in video games. Speaking of pop singers, I guess rapping, Coolio died, although he was fairly old, older than I would have thought. But yeah, that we might start to see Spotify just straight up doing deals with pop singers to put their songs in video games and make it a big deal. Pokemon is definitely a big enough deal on its own, though, that you wouldn't go for that cheap pop of advertisement by adding a song or soundtrack to it. It would make a lot more sense if Disney movies, if they were making a lot of new Disney movies, if they had pop songs from pop singers. But the problem with any idea like that is that the music industry really has no influence and power at all anymore. They've ruined their own industry, and they've ruined any creatives that were actually in the music industry long time ago, and now there are very few actual creatives that are actually writing good songs or singing good songs, and nobody's really listening to it. Nobody really has time for it. Moving on back to video games. Video Games Chronicle says World of Warcraft Dragonflight releases this November. A Lunar Shift Xbox Series X controller has been seemingly leaked. And once again, Video Games Chronicle is just showing the same screenshot of a standard black controller. Lunar Shift, almost certainly just another color palette on the controllers and nothing else to it. God of War's PC port studio says it's working on a Sony with a flagship live service game. Jetpack Interactive is also working on the God of War franchise. That's a little bit scary because that does maybe imply that we are going to have either a side game that is a live service game set in the God of War universe, or like Assassin's Creed, the God of War series after Ragnarok is going to try to become a live service game to keep people just playing over and over again, which that does seem somewhat believable if you think about it, that you could have a game like Diablo where you're playing as the God of War, just fighting monsters over and over again in multiple playthroughs. It's been a while since I've seen the Dad of War's nipples, and I guess I missed them a little bit. It's still fairly ridiculous that he's just not wearing a shirt. Or you know what? It's half in, half out that makes it so ridiculous. That he has this giant shoulder pad on one shoulder and then nothing on that side at all. Like he might as well just be shirtless or be fully armored. Let's see. Phil Spencer says Xbox is looking at letting players disable quick resume. The feature can cause issues with online games. I think at a certain level, as a programmer, you don't disable quick resume based on a user's request. You either disable quick resume specifically in those games, or you fix the problems with resuming a game in an online service. Inherently, quick resume is an evolution around putting a computer to sleep and waking it up. When you put a computer to sleep and wake it up, you're going to have to go through the process of spinning up any hard drives, reconnecting to the network, spinning up the network connection. There is just going to be a delay that moves it slightly away from being as quick as you might like it to be. Or you leave the hard drive spinning when it's in sleep mode and the network up when it's in sleep mode. But yeah, this is definitely a programming issue, not a user interface or user options issue. But yeah, I don't see a reason to disable a feature that works fairly well for most people. And this is also coming from Microsoft, remember, that is just removing features in general and removing options in general like crazy with Windows 11. Moving on, the Epic Game Store has confirmed its next free titles. Rising Hell and Slain Back from Hell will be free in early October. So they're having a Hell-themed October. Okay, that makes some sense. Ubisoft has announced a playtest for a new season-based co-op shooter called Project U. Which, okay. seem to have only one flat image so far to show you around it. It is nice to see that just because the game industry wanted to make live service games, that things like Overwatch or Project U or well, there's a lot of other games that came out that I can't even remember anymore. There was really a push to have things be like Overwatch, and the actual gaming community did not embrace that push to the level that the creators wanted to, and that's good. Like, we need to give pushback and actually demand games we want, and not just be sold games that people want to sell to you. Unfortunately, overall, I think the gaming community is probably getting pushed around way more than they should be around live service games and microtransactions and DLC and just a general rising cost in either money or time in playing a game, with a general lowering of quality being a side effect of a lot of these efforts. But yeah, with just one screenshot, I have no idea if Project U will be good or not. I don't think anybody knows. Overwatch 2's mobile phone verification system isn't working for some players. The new security measure has been brought in to combat cheating and disruptive behavior. Specifically, I heard that one of the prepaid services isn't supported in the United States. I want to say the prepaid service starts with an S. And it is just like a prepaid service that would be using AT&T or T-Mobile or Verizon's network, but there was seemingly something else around that. I also found out that you can't literally do anything until you have an SMS phone verification set up, and you can't use prepaid phone numbers, or they're trying very hard to not use prepaid phone numbers on it. So they're going fairly draconic, or I don't think that's the right word. Draconian? Yeah, they're going very draconian with their anti-cheat measures. On top of that, Overwatch 2 also, in its terms of service, admits that part of their system is going to be keeping recordings of any kind of voice chat for at least a brief amount of time. It's one of those scenarios where they're going to try and make the argument, well, we don't actually keep records of the voice chat, but we're saving it to a sound file so we can run text-to-speech over it to turn it into a text file, and then we're keeping those save files for a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, just in case the text-to-speech doesn't work. But at a certain level, anything that is keeping any records whatsoever, if it's saving any voice chat to any file, it's just saving it to a hard drive, and that file could be recovered years later, no matter what. Even if it is deleted, it's not, almost certainly not going to delete the file and then write over the hard drive space so you can't recover the file later in a quick, like, military grade delete process. Yep. And in general, I had no intention of ever playing Overwatch 2 in the first place, but I don't like it. I don't like the mean principle mentality that so many game makers have, where they are 100% actively focused on finding somebody to punish and to install more rules and regulations. This is supposed to just be a video game, and like playing on the playground, there might be a bully that says something mean on the playground. That doesn't mean you shut down the playground and cancel recess, or you put up cameras and or microphones all around the playground to listen and violate the privacy of the 99% to catch the 1% saying something bad. Um, and that's really what this is boiling down to, is that your privacy is severely getting violated here as a trade-off for playing a free-to-play game. And I doubt it's worth it to most, but there will be people that trade off their privacy not thinking about it. This is an interesting story I saw. Today's physical release for Bayonetta for the Switch has been delayed in Europe. The My Nintendo Store exclusive release is now targeting the first half of October, which that's weird, certainly. And yeah, you look at an image like this, since we're having a theme here of animated characters or animated women's butts. In Bayonetta's case, they definitely want you to look at her back and her butt. Interestingly, though, this is not actually showing the hair texture that you would expect, since her outfit is supposed to be made out of magical strands of her hair. But notice how there is a major emphasis here with the hip curve that is like backbreakingly unrealistic. I mean, just look at her spine there. But yeah, super skin tight, a V cut into the leather just to emphasize it more. And if anything, really, that's not the thing that you should be really have your eyes drawn to. Like, the back and the skin there is more emphasized. The gun is emphasized. The long hair band or hair ribbon is emphasized. The arm is emphasized. The hair on either side is emphasized. The logo is emphasized. The moon is emphasized. The angel feathers is emphasized. Sure, this is right front and center, but if you just focused on this, you're missing every other image in this thumbnail, and there's a lot that they want to actually pass along here as far as the visual image. And then some of the stuff as far as like the Bayonetta logo, I don't think that ever gets really explained as to why you have this kind of triangle A or this I, this weird symbol for the O, or what the background is. This is probably almost certainly just concept art for making the logo that doesn't really connect to what the first Bayonetta game is. We're anxiously awaiting, I believe, Bayonetta 3, which, looking at her logo, it's basically the same logo but now more purple. So I would hope that this is a story, and I don't think there actually is anything to really say here other than this thing happened, that the game was unexpectedly delayed. But I would imagine it's just for some weird reason and no other reason other than that. Maybe it's because of the Queen's death, and maybe it's because the Asian countries like in Japan are going into Golden Week, so it would be a little crazy if it took them 2 or 3 weeks to finally actually release the game. Could have been that it was just a typo in the first place. I doubt it, though. You wouldn't get that close to a release date without people noticing if that was the wrong point. In a lot of ways, this is also a example of Nintendo just not really caring about Bayonetta, and this may actively be a sabotage attempt on the European side as far as releasing games. But if it was a sabotage attempt, I don't know why it would only be happening in Europe. Yeah. The quote here is, "We're now aiming to release a physical edition in the first half of October, exclusively on My Nintendo Store." They probably just didn't get the shipment. That would be my guess, as the war in Russia made it harder to get physical discs on a boat and all the way to the UK, and then Brexit probably didn't happen either. So didn't Brexit probably didn't help either. So yeah, I imagine they just didn't actually physically get the shipments. Moving on, our last Video Games Chronicles article today says Microsoft has filed its case for the Activision acquisition with the EU competition regulator. The European Commission has set a provisional deadline of November 8th to rule on the deal. So basically they filed some legal paperwork, which doesn't mean anything. I really need to rush today, come to think of it, because if I am going to get back to playing Zero Time Dilemma, doing one episode of that is like an hour and 30 out of 45 minutes, and I'm going to really wreck my behind sitting in a chair that long for several episodes. Let's see, PlayStation Plus monthly lineup we've already talked about from Gamatsu, so we don't need to cover that. Armed Fantasia, The End of the Wilderness, and Penny Blood Double Kickstart has a closing live stream set for September 30th. What's weird here is this the only double Kickstarter game, or are there two now? I think this is the only one. I wonder if there is perhaps a trick here where you could do a double Kickstarter, find that the Kickstarter didn't really sell that well as a double Kickstarter, and then come back and do individual Kickstarters and try it again. But you definitely would need to take a few months off if you had any hope of that working. Skull and Bones being delayed, we've already talked about. PlayStation Stars launches September 29th in Japan and Asia, and October 5th in the Americas, and October 13th in Europe and Australia. The side-scrolling roguelike action game Oblivion Override has been announced for consoles and PCs. Let's jump through the screenshots. Yeah, that looks like that could be interesting. Certainly. The Witch's House MV for PS4, Xbox One, and Switch launches October 13th. This feels like a RPG Maker type game, with looking at the one screenshot we have there. And I feel like there is a RPG Maker version called RPG Maker MV. Otherwise, I don't know what MV really stands for. Inertial Drift Twilight Rivals Edition launches October 20th. This, I assume, is a racing game. Don't recognize this game if it's been talked about before. Yep, and a trailer like this is not really selling the actual gameplay and visuals you would see during the gameplay every time you jump into a flat 2D animated interior shot. Yeah, there could be a racing game here, but it seems like you're racing only against one other person. There is a certain thought there. Like, so many games are more Mario Kart-ish, or where you're just racing against a group of people. But if you focused on just having one rival that always rubber banded and was close to you and always potentially overpassing you, maybe you could reduce the amount of polygons you have to put on the screen by having 10 cars and increase the amount of actual driving artificial intelligence in that the one rival car is doing. Although I don't inherently play a racing game and think, boy, are the other racers really dumb or making the wrong moves, as much as I feel like I'm just doing really good and focusing on myself in a racing game. And maybe you bring it down to just like 4 racers instead of 2. or even 3. That way somebody can crash into somebody else without it affecting the third person. A side-scrolling run-and-gun platformer called Planet Cube Edge launches in early 2023 for basically everything, according to Gametsu. I think we'd already seen the trailer for this one. Yeah, this is one of those games that if you're super nostalgic of Game Boy games, you might want to play it just because it looks like a Game Boy game. But as somebody who is not nostalgic of the look of Game Boy games, I'm never really interested in a game that looks like it is. Looks like it's a grayscale type game. Boca Game Studio has a video, A Day with the Programmer Tatsuya Matsushita, featuring snippets of in-development Slitterhead footage. I've forgotten about the game Slitterhead completely. This might be very interesting to follow a programmer if you want to be a programmer. 11 minutes here. But it also feels very cinematically designed, like a documentary where somebody paid a lot of effort and money to show something. And the experience of a big name programmer and developer in Japan is not really that big of a deal. I believe he's using Visual Studio Code there, if I was to guess, but it could be a different programming software that looks about the same. This is kind of a great example of what a tech demo should look like. Games that don't have a lot of textures on them and walls that don't have a lot of textures on them. You can see the Unreal Engine there. That is definitely Unreal Engine programming, I would assume, where you have more of a drag and drop elements that are a top level on top of the code. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's actually doing his coding inside of Unreal Engine and that wasn't Visual Studio Code. But he's also kind of playing around here with more elements than I would expect a programmer to specifically play around with. In the sense that I wouldn't expect him to try and do a full top to bottom development of a game. I'd expect programmers to be doing the low level coding and then you hand that over to a level designer or movement animation designer. Yeah, it seems like you're going to see very little images. And see, that also looks like Unreal, but it looks like a different Unreal. So, and I'm in a weird position right now at this point where I'm thinking I would recommend new programmers to go to learn Rust over C, C++, C#. C++ will certainly keep you busy fixing old code and legacy code, so you should learn it at some point, but I think the Rust programming language very possibly is the language that people should just be forced to move towards. Of course, there's an entire graveyard full of better languages than C that don't ever get adopted. Yeah, you'd really have to follow along with the text, though, to really watch all that. And it seems like they pretty much typed almost everything he said in that video. And as far as what Slitterhead is, I don't really know any more now than when I started. I also meant to point out that his office he was working in looked like it was just a spare bedroom. It very possibly isn't in Japan, because I doubt Japanese houses have a lot of spare bedrooms, but he definitely isn't in a bright, shiny corner office somewhere full of people and full of super powerful computers or anything like that. It is just kind of a normal, small, enclosed area with a normal, decent computer. Famitsu has its updated sales, Splatoon 3 continuing to dominate, Taiko no Tatsujin making it to the second spot this week as far as the drumming game, and then Horizon Forbidden West doing pretty great at the third spot. Then Nintendo Switch dominates until the 9th spot, again with the Dueled Chronicle actually making the 8th spot. I thought people hated that game, at least they hated it on Steam. Dragon Quest X makes the 9th spot for the PS4. And then we've got an older game, I believe, Juzen Nigai from ID Factory getting the 14th spot. Noticeably too, though, you only have to sell a couple thousand in Japan to get some fairly high in the sales numbers. There just aren't that many Japanese people buying video games, or that many Japanese people in general. What's funny is you have the PS4 and the PS5 versions of Dueled Chronicles way lower than the Switch version of the Dueled Chronicles. But that is effectively a one-to-one comparison. You merge these two numbers here in the same week, and you have roughly 5,500 people buying the Dueled Chronicle for PlayStations compared to 6,400 people buying it on the Nintendo Switch. And even with decent sales here for the PlayStation 5, the Switch is still beating it out, and the OLED model is doubling it as far as PlayStation 5. And noticeably, possibly because of Golden Week, we have a considerably high number of sales on the Xbox Series S. Like, this may be the best week ever for the Xbox Series S at 11,000. Even though that is less than half of PlayStation 5, that is still a major success for Xbox. Noticeably though, we're seeing less interest in the Xbox Series X. Maybe they just have less in stock. And then the Nintendo Switch Lite, its interest also has plummeted, perhaps because they're out of stock. And then the PlayStation 5 digital version is very low. So it's locking down to the point where gamers in Japan may have decided we want the cheap Xbox Series S, we want the expensive PlayStation, and we want the expensive LED model of the Switch, but we will still buy the regular version of the Switch also. And everything else they are just not really interested in at all. Let's see. The game The Night Witch launches November 29th, according to Gamatsu. Cuphead Physical Edition for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Switch has been announced, and it includes the DLC Delicious Last Course. And at this rate, I'm sitting too far back, and it's time to readjust myself. I definitely have noticed that as the winter has come, or winter is coming, my back has started twinging a lot more. I was doing great basically in summer, just no back spasms at all, and now every time I twist, basically I'm getting a back spasm, and that certainly sucks. And the chair being uncomfortable is just a thing that always happens after sitting in a chair. Like, I've been effectively sitting in this chair for 4 hours now, because I did an hour and 40-minute recording before this, which I knew that was going to be a stupid thing to do, but I got it done, so I'm not terribly upset with that. A lot of these articles are redundant, so I'm just clicking through them. Falling Out launches October 6th for basically everything. A charming roguelite adventure, it says. It feels somewhat like the what is that other game? There's a game a couple years ago where you were going through these dungeons and they'd get harder and harder, and the game was frankly a little too difficult for me even in early levels, so I never got very far with it. So if Falling Out decided to be the easy version of that game, I want to say the game I'm talking about is called La Mulana, but I think actually it isn't that game. But yeah, there was like two games that look very similar to that. We already talked about Sackboy: A Big Adventure coming to PC on October 27th. The Entropy Center launches November 30th. This is I think, puzzle platformer. That being said, this trailer looks interesting. Nope, this is a completely different game than what I was thinking of. I was thinking of something totally different. Yeah, this feels very much like a Portal game, if not made by Valve and not hampered by the fact that we won't get potentially more games. You have some kind of electric gun with an AI talking to you. You can move things around and potentially affect gravity. Well, this is very intriguing, certainly. Apparently you just blew up the earth. Yeah, not listening to this, to the audio of this, this actually looks very interesting. Seems like maybe there's alternate dimensions or different timelines also as part of it. Alright, well that has got my attention quite a bit. Next big thing, although you do run into a slight problem here in that there is at least one other game that's about to come out that's very similar to this game, and at least visually. Also, I've never heard of Stubby Games, I've never heard of PlayStack, so there's this danger of it being all flash and not actually being good. I think part of the trick here is that you're not actually moving things as much as you're rewinding things through an established timeline, or fast forwarding things through an established timeline. So you can only go back or forward in its own timeline, an object can, based on what it has already done or would do. And definitely I'm going to put that on the follow list. And it says November 3rd, so I'm not going to sit on that for a YouTube short. Let's go through some of the games that came out on Steam, and we'll get back to Gamatsu. Charlie's Day here. Looks like it's a kid's point and click adventure game, so I'll give that a follow. To Be a King is an adult game. Volume 1. I feel like there was a similar game to this that came out just a couple days ago. Interesting in that this is one of these 3D model Western adult games. but it doesn't really look that terrible. The timing is pretty good around the prequel series of Game of Thrones, and oddly, it seems to be really only willing to go softcore in its screenshots. Yeah, I guess that's still technically softcore if they show someone's lower half but don't show penetration. Um, but yeah, a lot of these screenshots are just showing side boobs and nipples, and they're really not getting to the extreme level that most of these screenshots tend to go, because it seems oddly too extreme in a lot of their screenshots. The game is $11.04. It is Volume 1. It's English only. As a Western adult game, it doesn't look terrible. It does still kind of run into the problem of it seeming like it is just a visual novel or a collection of scenes and nothing else. I don't see any real gameplay here. Some of the characters, the way they're drawn and the way they're interacting with each other, is actually rather sweet too. It's not just characters immediately getting to the banging. They're showing pictures of people kissing, feeding each other, just actually caring about the characters. So it feels like there's a little bit more effort put into it. But still, it would be pretty much impossible to make that into a YouTube family friendly video if I was to try and cover that game. I don't think this Horrors of Space is quite visually polished enough to interest me. Here we have another adult game, Robin Morningwood Adventure, a gay RPG. Noticeably here, I would call this probably a Western game in that the animation is flat and kind of animated like you would expect a Cartoon Network cartoon to be animated by. There's a lot of guys with a lot of penises hanging out in these screenshots, and then the rest of the game seems to be like a city manager in which you're just repairing and expanding your house or neighborhood. It's $31.99, which is ridiculously expensive. It supports English and French. There is a green troll character, if that matters, but otherwise it is just big muscly guys fighting, sleeping with other big muscly guys. That the archetype is probably too unique, too similar between the different characters. So yeah, visually it's not drawn terribly, but character design wise it's a little rough, as it were. I think you probably would want more of a game slightly, and more variety in the characters, definitely. And you definitely wouldn't want to pay $31 for a game like that. Although there is a certain point where I do think some of these adult games have gotten away with severely overcharging people in the past. I doubt that that's the way it should be, or that's the way it is from nowadays, though. Yeah, but yeah, there definitely was a point where an adult visual novel being sold for like the PC Engine in the 80s was being sold for what would have been the equivalent of $60-$70 for just a couple hours of content. This Nano Hive doesn't look like anything of interest. Let's see, Bad Chicken is a side-scroll shooter game. I'll give that a YouTube short. Although at a certain point, side-scroll shooting games are probably not the kinds of games I want to play. Here you have a game called Witchy Life Story. where you're playing as a darker skinned characters or witches, seems like. Maybe get to pick. Doesn't look terrible. Not sure it is amazingly great. This again feels like more of a mobile game being ported over to PC. It says it has English full audio, but I doubt that's really the case. Let's see. Moving on. Death in the Night. This is one of those games that I think I'd have to say probably has dark screenshot syndrome, where it's just black foreground on black background. Just not quite visually interesting enough to want to play it. So I'd have to say no to that. Infinity. Looks like it's probably an asset flip game. You can even see at the beginning here. We are a small indie team who founded Disney Pixels with a dream of making great games with soul and integrity. Not even talking about the game halfway through the description. We're working on the first game, Infinity, an action-adventure puzzle side-scroller, which, yeah, you should pick a lane in making a game always, with a unique 3D aspect. This game is garbage. This is a company trying to sell a sales pitch, not sell a game or sell themselves instead of selling a game. That's the kind of description you would expect if you're going to a publisher looking for funds to develop a game. That's not the description you would use on Steam. We are potentially going to run into a point where we start seeing more of these stealth games as a potential Metal Gear Solid competitor. Although in this case, I think I can say no to this specific game, but you know what, I won't. I'll just move forward. Numbers and Letters VR. Yeah, I don't think I'd want to put VR on the head of a child for educational reasons, or for safety reasons, or both. So I'm going to say no to that. We have a game called The Deep, which has some interesting screenshots, but I'm not sure that there really is a game there. It doesn't have a release date or anything, so I'm gonna not do anything with it so far. And we have a game called The Darkest Star, which is a space game. Turn-based space strategy game. Yeah, it's a little unfair because I really don't like space games in general. So I dismiss them in an unfair way. And now that I'm doing the YouTube shorts, I think I'm still going to stick with that thought and dismiss them in an unfair way and just not give them as much of a chance. My bias is probably just too high against space games. Also, I don't think that many people actually want to see space games on the YouTube shorts. Although that could be feedback that I could get, certainly, is all of a sudden if I start to see all the YouTube shorts of space games get way more views than YouTube shorts of anything else, then the audience will have spoken then, and I should look out to hear that message. Yeah, this one's not quite polished enough either. Gelatin doesn't look good enough. I suppose today, if we have a... Let's just double check to see if there's any adult content in this game. If we have more Western adult games today, that only really feels like that would balance out the slightly more Eastern adult games on Wednesday. It seems like we're getting adult games coming out fairly randomly at this point. Adult content includes a few illustrations of veiled nudity, kissing and dialogue between characters or certain sexual jokes and implications. Characters in their sexual relationship does not shown on screen, but acts are brought up in conversations afterwards. Some dialogue contain talks and discussions about self-harm and themes of incest. Also, every appearing character in the game is over 18 years old, which, yeah, okay. They're saying that every single time. There's no DLC, like, uncensored patch for this game on Steam, but I feel like this is probably one of those games that does have an uncensored patch at some point. That a scene like this would maybe make them more scantily clad or naked. You have here two Moe style characters that look fairly young because of the Moe style, with their giant heads and shorter arms and legs and length. Although for the Moe style you can definitely go more shorter. Yeah, I imagine it is a straight up visual novel and this is just a gag image. But looking at all these screenshots, I wouldn't really expect too much from this if you're looking for adult content. Instead, it is a fully voiced Japanese visual novel, and for that reason, I think it probably deserves a follow. But I'm gonna have to think about whether I have enough room to do visual novels on the YouTube Shorts. Like, inherently, I'd think that doing visual novels and having the images of visual novels on the YouTube Shorts would maybe get me more views, but it would be views of people just thinking that they're watching a cartoon or an animated sequence instead of a short based off of the trailer for a video game. So that might not be the right audience that I'm looking for. I don't want to just trick people into watching my videos. I want to actually have an audience that appreciates the videos and gets something out of it. Epifrog here looks like it might be something, so I'll give that a follow. Fate Chapter 2 looks like it's an escape the room horror asset flip game, so no to that. Mythica Adventures looks like a platformer. Seems like it's fairly zoomed out without it really showing you any actual interactions. Notably, there isn't a video here. It says it's coming soon and it's trying to get a Kickstarter campaign going. Yep. This is the problem, certainly, of allowing people to just make pages on Steam and then say coming soon, release date soon. Should be more limitations on having an actual, at least tentative release date. To list your game on Steam, you probably need to have within 1 year of the day you make the page a release date. 1 year is more than fair. This is interesting in that we're seeing a lot of Arabic writing in the trailer for what looks like just a mobile game. And interesting also that they have called this digital pen, not to be confused with the school DigiPen. But yeah, if you make a listing and you say your game is coming out a year from now and the game is never listed in that year's time, then I think at that point Steam has a very valid argument to just remove your game from being listed and saying, hey, you gotta pay another $100 at that point for Steam Direct to list your game again. and that would be hopefully enough punishment for people making listings and then never delivering a game to the point where they wouldn't bother to list it a second time. Or maybe you just straight up say, no, you can't ever list this game on Steam. We're not doing business with you. You're such a bad businessman that you didn't deliver after a full year of having time to deliver. This Frigid VR game, I'm going to give a follow to, just because it might be something interesting. I'm being too generous, probably. I'm trying to burn through all these games. This Burrito Quest looks like it's a surreal joke game. I don't even know if I'd bother to call it an asset flip game. I'll just say it looks like a joke game, and it looks too much like a joke and not enough like a game for me to want to follow it. 3 Days Ghost of War definitely doesn't look like there's enough interaction here for me to want to play it. Light doesn't look like anything. Well, nope, this is not an adult game. I just kind of assumed that because of the Bikini Bottom character. We have a game here called Melody's Escape, which is apparently an Infinite Runner Melody's Escape 2. I'm almost certain that I've seen a Melody's Escape 1, and that I think it was somewhat popular, but this feels like a different experience where it's an Infinite Runner procedurally generated around music. Part of the problem here, certainly as a YouTube content creator, is there's just no way I could actually engage with this and play with this, because if I try to put my own music in it, I'd get content ID'd. If I tried to play the game, I might get content ID'd. Seems like you're swapping the hair colors of the character to match the rhythm. In a funny way, you're going to get very bored quickly, I'm sure, of seeing the same character run in the same animation over and over again. Yeah, I don't think there's a need for me to put this on the follow list, but if you liked Melody's Escape 1, let's see if we can do a little bit of research here and just see how the reception was for... Nope, that was Melody's Escape 2. Trying to click on Melody's Escape 1. Yeah, this is on the wish list. So, yeah, you can see this game looked very different in its first version of being an infinite runner. And honestly, I only really remember the thumbnail. Actually looking at the gameplay now, I'm not actually that interested in it. So this is one of those rare cases where I'm just going to straight up remove that from the wish list, which means I have to click the control button to do that. And make the decision to just skip this game. If you're big into music though, I'd definitely say check out the first game. Obviously it's very positive, and the second game is seemingly trying to move in that same direction of making it more interesting to have a procedurally generated musical game. Commanding Nations doesn't look particularly interesting. Come on, mouse. I don't know if it's a mouse or my hand that doesn't want to move at the moment. Let's see. Imago Beyond Nightmares. Looks like it's a walking simulator. There might be something to that. Yeah, I have no idea. Like, is it just my mouse battery's dying? Or what? Feels like my mouse does run into these problems fairly often where I'm getting these weird slowdowns. I think it straight up is the Logitech drivers potentially crashing. Let me test that. Let's see. Logitech options, Logitech unifying software. No, I think it's probably my mouse pad, if anything. Well, suffice it to say, well, let's just move on. I very well just have gotten too much grease on it or something. Eva, final mission doesn't look like anything I care about. Tuning champions. Doesn't look visually polished enough for a racing game. Hack and Schultz. Doesn't look like anything I'd care about. We obviously have a decent amount of games today. Cycle of the Moon. Looks like total garbage. Bright Seeker. Now, I suppose if we don't actively see any adult game come out that's an Eastern adult game today, there might be a slight concern there, but I don't think a huge concern. Particularly around Golden Week, I'm not really expecting a lot of Japanese games to come out, or Asian games to come out. Escape Memoirs, mini stories, that's nothing. Plague Lords. Yeah, there might be something to this. Turn-based combat, dark fantasy. I don't think so though. Because I was thinking it was like a Diablo game, but actually looking at how it turns and plays, it's more like a real-time strategy without the real-time element. So yeah, I'm gonna say no to that. Choice of Life, Middle Ages 2. Yeah, that looks different. So we'll give that a follow. Charming Blood. Now, again, let's come over here and just make sure this is YouTube family friendly. Yeah. You have a visual novel with what look like anime vampire characters. The animation style actually looks a little rough, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is not actually a Japanese game, English and Ukrainian, but you don't get a lot of that. Also, you have no adult content mentioned at all here, so I would suspect that you're not going to see any of that either. As a story, as a culture, I don't know if Ukrainians really mix well with this kind of game or this kind of narrative. That being said, vampires probably do mix fairly well into Eastern Europe concepts. But yeah, it's definitely not promising a lot, and it doesn't have a release date, so I'm just going to wait until this actually does have a release date. Of course, that is assuming a lot that you will get another notification, and maybe you will, maybe you won't. Here we have a game called What is Love, which is more of a 3D animation style, and noticeably you are straight up seeing school age kids of some sort age in school uniforms. And then you have an older girl. Like, so if the rule really was you can't have anime characters in school uniforms, this is a slightly more Western school uniform, but it definitely is a school uniform, no doubt about it. Here you have a more shorter moe type character that probably is storyline wise younger. 200 beautiful animations putting you in a bunch of different a bunch of different costumes. It says it's going to have full English audio. I doubt that. And then it seems like it's going to try to lean towards the lewd instead of the nude, as it were, because it's just suggestive themes and no actual, well, partial nudity, it says, as a trigger warning. Wow, we really need to have a rant at some point in the future as far as trigger warnings. Well, like, I get it that maybe you would want to give trigger warnings, and I would say give, never demand, but I could get it for sexual assault. Death seems a little ridiculous. People die in forms of art non-stop. Like, action movies, hundreds if not thousands of people die. Star Wars blew up entire planets, entire Death Stars. Sizeism or fat shaming. Yeah, I think that's pretty ridiculous. But then you get to partial nudity. Who in the world is actually getting triggered by partial nudity? And why in the world should anybody accommodate somebody being triggered by partial nudity? That you're getting dangerously close to the joke of the never nudes from Arrested Development, where people are afraid of their body being nude and are always clothed 24/7 no matter what. Medical issues is very broad, and again, not really something that deserves to have a trigger warning. If anything deserves to have a trigger warning, divorce is incredibly normal, and again, doesn't deserve a trigger warning. If anything does, but people are just getting crazy with trigger warnings. And honestly, before even the phrase trigger warning existed, I definitely know I would have, in the past when I was younger, had conversations that pissed off some people and had people acting upset and like Karens often. And you know what? I, even in a very young age, realized that it was not worth it to accommodate people who are going to be upset about just talk, free speech and all of that. And when people are going to get upset about those things, they're going to get upset about everything, and frankly those people are not worth accommodating or talking to. So it is beneficial to give the kiss off and just piss off somebody so they go away quickly than it is to try to accommodate people and say trigger warning this, trigger warning that. This Tomb Explorer VR looks interesting, and it kind of feels like a full game, which I really wasn't expecting that. I almost thought it was an adult game, looking at the female character, which, if anything, that probably just highlights how almost every 3D model that you can asset flip and pre-purchase is first and foremost designed to show as much cleavage and nudity as possible, and then it's up to the asset flipper whether they actually put some clothes on the character or not. And that is true. Certainly, if you are going to buy a 3D model, there is more than likely going to start as a nude model, and then you're going to add clothes to it. Perhaps not a fully detailed nude model, but a nude model nonetheless. But yeah, I'll give this a follow as a VR game. Yeah, we only have 3 more games though, and so it does seem odd that this Friday we haven't seen a single Eastern game actually being sold as an Eastern adult game. And yeah, we've seen a couple of games that definitely feel like they might have nudity patches released later. Nothing about Graviton catches my interest. Flames might be something as a point and click adventure. Okay, so then let's go back to the Gamatsu articles. Summertime Rendering Another Horizon launches January 26th in Japan. And yep, this is that visual novel Switch game where the guy has a gun, which is interesting. And it's been a while since we've had to point out the artistic choices / censorship that tends to happen between the cover art for the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 discs. Obviously, they are the same height, but then there's a black bar at the top. You don't have to use that PlayStation 4 logo, but it does get used and it does take up space. So you'd have to squish things down a little bit, but honestly, there was enough room to do that anyways. It's not just that this image was shifted down so that it would have cut off this character's knees. This image is also zoomed in, cutting off the circular aspect of the background, and it is also shifted to the left, cutting off more of her thigh. So even though they didn't really accomplish that much in this case, because you're still seeing plenty of thigh and skin in general, with her being in a one-piece swimsuit, school swimsuit style. And basically, I think he's in a swimsuit also, with a shirt on. Even though they really didn't accomplish much, they definitely seem to have spent a lot of energy here to try and cut off skin for not much of a reason, where it would have been better, I think, just to keep it at the same zoom and shift the image down, and even keeping it at the zoomed out part and shifting down would have probably cut off even more skin. But yeah, that's kind of a slight rant to even have as far as all the censorship that is going on. The cover art is the least important because you can always still see what's actually in the game if it's not censored, or a lot of times there's reversible covers that you can print out or get just by reversing the cover. Although reversible covers don't really work that great because then you're folding the crease backwards. Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope has its story trailer according to Gamatsu. If you want to check that out, I don't care enough to check it out. Shady Stadia being shut down doesn't need to be talked about again. The Callisto Protocol, The Truth of Black Iron trailer is available. I do want to watch this one, or at least skip through it. 2 minutes, rated M for mature. I definitely want everybody to see every single possible trailer or bit of news around the Callisto Protocol, good or bad, because it definitely is the game that deserves attention compared to the designed by committee half-ass attempt at rebooting Dead Space that they only approved to basically screw over the creator of Dead Space, or one of the original persons that worked on Dead Space, making Callisto Protocol instead, which obviously there's some level of actual animosity there, because EA wouldn't just approve a game just to screw over a creator alone. Now notice in this trailer we're seeing him in snow again, and the snowy element of Dead Space 3 was probably one of the worst environments, and just because it's not visually appealing. So invoking that again might be a mistake. And yeah, we may find that the Callisto Protocol just repeats or exacerbates the mistakes of the previous Dead Space series, instead of making a better game and being set in a different universe that isn't dragged down by kind of ridiculous storyline elements. In a lot of ways, this feels like what a Resident Evil game could be if you were going to make a brand new Resident Evil game outside of the Resident Evil series. So yeah, that mostly looks pretty good visually. Like, very good in the graphics. Gameplay wise, they're not really showing us a lot though. Let's see. It's just a To the Moon series beach episode apparently has been announced for PC, which I guess the idea is that this is a To the Moon side story that they're describing as a beach episode. I would heavily suspect there might be some secret in this otherwise, or that it turns into like a horror game or something else, and it's selling itself on the surprise. But yeah, that is weird, certainly. And I do know the game To the Moon is somewhat popular, at least amongst mainstream video game critics, but I don't think it's that popular to deserve a spin-off one way or the other. RPG Maker Unite details smartphone export build destination platforms. Exporting to a smartphone is now easier than ever, which at a certain point, yeah, if you're making garbage RPG makers for cell phones, that makes me as a PC gamer less likely to really complain about that. The state of cell phone games is already pretty bad, so I wouldn't expect too much from that. I wouldn't expect it really to hurt the industry too much. Notice how almost all this text is in, I imagine, Japanese, which I think very much highlights the people they think are using RPG Maker as an audience as a bunch of Japanese people. But I don't even know if that's really the case. I don't know if there's a large number anymore of anybody using RPG Maker, because RPG Maker games are so universally disliked in their visuals now that you really can't sell anything that looks like an RPG Maker game. Gamatsu says Undecember launches October 12th worldwide. It's an interesting name. What kind of game is it? A more high action top down hack and slash game. And at a certain point, I guess the question becomes, what makes a Diablo game versus a high action hack and slash top down game? Or are those exactly the same thing? I would say very possibly, because of the cinematic trailer not showing a recognizable health and mana to refill. And if you're not pressing buttons on a keyboard or doing the equivalent to drink potions while you're fighting, like in Diablo, then maybe it stops being a Diablo game at that point. In a lot of ways, if you just streamlined and smoothed the experience around the Diablo games to be a better game, you stop it from being a Diablo game. that there is this mid-tier level of challenge that you have to just expect to exist in a Diablo game that you don't have to expect to exist in something like this game. Yeah, on December looks interesting. And then World Rally Championship Generations has been delayed to November 3rd. Alright, well then that we'll try and rush through the GameDeveloper.com articles and then we'll call it a day. We already talked about Savvy Games Fund, or Savvy Games Group. This is a much better logo. You could definitely get away with putting that on a video game company. Video game and nobody realizing that it's Saudi Arabia. We already talked about Stadia. There's really nothing to say about Stadia at all. Verizon has partnered with Razers and Qualcomm on 5G gaming handheld, which, yeah, it sounds like they're going to be really late to the party by the time that actually came out. And honestly, it's probably just going to be an attempted competitor to the Steam Deck that is as dumb of an idea or as dumb of a product as the Logitech G Cloud. Yeah, I talked about the Watchdog creative director joining NetEase. You know what is interesting too is you often don't hear a story of somebody leaving or even taking time off for their family and then joining a new company when that leave is done or their time off with their family is done. If somebody has a new job, they tend to pretty much seem to be working for one company one day and then starting with the next company the next day. And that tends to imply that this was a fairly amicable transition. Whereas if somebody says I'm taking off time for medical reasons or family reasons or personal reasons, you have to always assume that's because they've literally been fired and they are absolutely hated by their former employee. And then sadly there's just so many lies in saying I'm taking times off for medical reasons that if you actually do have a medical problem, you tend not to be believed, particularly in the game industry where people don't take time off even if they do have legitimate reasons to take time off. Let's see. Limited Run Games launches a game book imprint called Press Run. This might be cool, but it might not, because I have this vague memory in my head that Limited Run Games was getting more into the censorship avenue of how they were publishing or releasing what in the past have been very much niche games that people wouldn't want censored, particularly if there's a collectible aspect to it. So a book publishing element of that seems potentially dangerous, but we'll have to see. On the other hand, it is also incredibly dangerous why in the world would you get into physical book publishing other than possibly to save yourself money for all the collectible books that you are publishing with your games? Maybe that's the in there, but physical book printing almost certainly doesn't make you money these days. It's not an industry you'd want to get into. If anything, I'm still very surprised that Marvel and DC haven't gone 100% digital and just said, you know what, we're going to stop printing books completely. Just screw the comic book stores for whatever of them are still around and alive after 2 years of a pandemic, and let's just save ourselves and go digital. I can see Disney doing that fairly easily. Let's see. Oh, here's some important information. Google is being asked to expand the wireless support for Stadia controllers so it can live on. Some people are even petitioning Google to open source the controller's firmware. So basically, the controller is useless at this point. Yeah, it says you won't need to return, the controllers won't be needed to be returned for the refunds. Yeah, in a lot of ways, unless they do kind of open source the firmware or find something, it doesn't. It is literally just going to become e-waste. Here's the answer I was looking for. Although it's Bluetooth and Wi-Fi enabled, the device cannot currently be used wirelessly without a Stadia or compatible Chromecast device. So, yeah. Total e-waste, and not like reusable batteries or components in it that you could really do something. The batteries might be reusable, but kind of nothing else. You'd have to get down to the point where you are just trying to hardwire each button and each input and replacing the entire circuitry, which is a much more complicated process if you're going to just try and make a Stadia controller still work. If you can't change the programming and the functionality, and that's too much work for most people. Twitch is testing out an experimental feature that will let viewers pay up to $100 to highlight a message in chat. If anything, this is Twitch just being very late to the party as far as what super chats are in YouTube, because super chats already do that, and it can be way more than $100. I don't think there really is a maximum limit in which you can donate money and put a message there. No guarantees on super chats in YouTube's case to get even 2.5 minutes of something being highlighted, and almost certainly somebody stealing a credit card and spending $100 for 2.5 minutes of some offensive hate speech on somebody's stream will not fly. So there almost certainly is going to be some way that the streamer can take down your message, even if you do pay $100 to keep it up. But yeah, Twitch is desperate to make money anywhere it can, and it's probably a year away from being shut down by Amazon if it can't show at least a movement towards making more money and being profitable. And I wouldn't put it past Amazon to shut it down completely. Although, in all fairness, Amazon hasn't really given up or shut down anything that it's acquired that I can think of. It does seem to, for the most part, let things just linger around. Submissions are now open for the Independent Games Festival Awards. If you're interested in that, check out GameDeveloper.com. And then, let's see. Valheim as a game is still in early access since February of 2021. So it's been over a year. I think this is also more of a multiplayer game. I think I can say no to this and remove this from the fall list. It looks pretty and all, but yeah. We're kind of in a different position even now compared to February of 2021, where you can just play God of War and get a similar Viking type story. Vikings were all the fad for a brief second there, as the Vikings TV show was popular, and then 2 to 4 years after that, people had made video games based off of the Vikings TV show. Yeah, this is a game I probably would say no to, but I'll give it more time. We're into the V's, by the way, so we are really running to the end of the listed things. Vagrus, the River Realms. I'm gonna leave this just because I don't want to make a decision. See, V Rising. Is this a player versus player game? Seems to be mostly player versus player. It's very positive as a game, but it's also early access, so I'll give it more time. Let's see. Turn-based visual novel that's very positive. You know what? I think I'm just not going to make any decisions today at all, because I probably need to wrap up and go to the bathroom. So I'm just going to close these really fast. Yeah, this one's mixed reviewed, so we can remove that one easily. And just give everything else some more time. Yep. Well, this is mostly positive. Urban cards. Put that on the wish list. And then Uranus is a weird looking surreal game. I'll give it some more thought later. I did need to play a little bit more, or it would have been beneficial to play a little bit more with the daily quest. But as long as I get to Duel live, that's fine. And then I have like 31 new tweets, so I'm going to scroll down my Twitter feed very quickly here, and then that's going to be it for the stream. New RetroArch version has been released. We'll talk about that on Monday. Yeah, noticeably we didn't get any Eastern adult games today, but we saw quite a bit on Wednesday. There's not enough of them really to average out, though, as far as adult games of any type. This was one of the games, though, as far as censorship, that we'll talk about on Monday. Chaos Head Noah for PC apparently not coming to Steam, and Spike Chunsoft is looking for alternative storefronts, which is to imply that there was something there Steam is saying no to. So this may be the first point, and we'll talk about it more on Monday, certainly, where we're going to have actual accusations or somewhat allegations of actual censorship on Steam's front versus the idea that censorship is happening but nobody's talking about it, which tends to be the case around Steam. Yeah, there was a report saying that a Stadia exclusive Death Stranding successor was turned down by Google, which in the long run that would have been the smart move on Google's part, since they ended up shutting down the whole thing. I suspect that's probably why they're shutting down Stadia, is that they literally just looked at what they had to work with for the next year and realized that they couldn't make enough contracts or have enough games to be potentially an exclusive experience. The Marvel Snap game from Second Dinner is now wishlistable on Steam for early access. I guess I still will check that game out, even though I'm fairly certain I'm not going to bother to actually try and play it. Yeah, at a certain level, if you're looking at your next year's budget and your plans for the next year's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and you've got nothing to look forward to, shutting down your company or shutting down your service like Stadia makes a lot of sense. Alright, well, I guess on that note, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and give me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.